Hey everybody, David the editor here. We are now on part 2 of Zach's interview with Nancy Wood. This discussion has so far tackled some of the history behind drug policy and reform. And in this part, Zach and Dr. Wood will explore how drug policy reflects the greater government and governed power dynamic at play here. For all my poli-sci and philosophy nerds, this one's for you. Enjoy.
I see what you're saying. I guess as I formulated this question, in this day and age, marijuana law is changing rapidly over the last decade. Lots of states are saying, hey, it's within our right, even though the federal government says it has no medical use and highly addictive potential. Citizens are in the norm.
I don't know the federal government says that. They certainly recognize its use for cancer and seizures in children.
It's still, last I read, it's still considered a Schedule 1 controlled substance. Was where I was taking that kind of statement from. The other side of that is going back to alcohol. That's commonly used, very normal in our society. You can't drive down the freeway without seeing a billboard for alcohol, yet everybody knows that you shouldn't, damn well better not, get behind the wheel after you've been drinking. Now that doesn't stop it. We experimented with prohibition in the 1900s, and that didn't work. So I'm curious, like how our society chose A and not B. You'll find opinions on both that. Nobody should be intoxicated at all, is the opinion of some people. Other people say, hey, your drugs are bad, but my drugs are okay. It's as we talk about deviating from the norm, I think our society is so broad and diverse, it's hard to define a norm anymore.
What they would say by what I will not use that word normal. So when I say norm, what I mean is typical. What is typical in a certain behavior, like the example I gave you. It is not typical that you would be on a busy boulevard and crawl across the street. So that would be deviating from what we would consider a way to get from one side to the other, right? So I'm talking about statistically, it's an outlier, right? How many times, that's not something you see every day, typically. So when I think you're asking, correct me if I'm wrong, when did it become problematic, or when did the government feel that it had to step in and regulate? Is that what you're asking?
That kind of goes into my next question. The Controlled Substance Act that regulates chemicals now came into effect about 50 years ago. And so my own research shows that a lot of that was political. And using,
totally.
using the example of a hallucinogen, atypical or against the norm behavior happened in the hippie movement. It also had a huge effect on our culture moving forward. Marijuana laws probably were targeting Mexican migrant workers. Unfortunately, I have a lot that I've read and I don't have anything quoted right in front of me. Anyway, so we have this 50-year-old Controlled Substance Act. What are some of the pros and cons of the policy that is in place now?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, if we criminalizing the use of drugs only filled the pockets of, prisons that are privatizing, right? Our whole system is one of punitive nature. So if there's a law and you break that law, there is a consequence that beyond your own consequence, right, that you feel, there is another consequence that is looked upon as a punishment, right? And so when you start punishing people for maladaptive behavior of any sort, all kinds of doors open for corruption, for people to, make money off of criminalizing human behavior, many aspects of human behavior. I believe that the drug act you're referring to was the 1970 drug act,
Controlled Substance Act.
Yeah,
Under the Nixon
I
administration.
think it was 1970. So, and that was when the DEA really started to become involved, right? The Drug Enforcement Agency. So from a political standpoint, it is very far-reaching. It's far-reaching. It was far-reaching then. I mean, people have been, smoking pot for probably since the beginning of time. If you go back into some of the music from the 1920s, reefer madness, there's so, it was part of a subculture at that point. And so when anything is criminalized and controlled, it opens the door for getting away from that personal consequence that the person feels for that whatever it is that they did, and moving them way over here to this punishment type of activity that does not lend itself to, like prison, that doesn't lend itself to understanding the symptom. So there's no treatment that is being provided should someone want treatment. There is not safe detox from a racial standpoint. In the 70s and the 80s in particular, with crack, when crack became popular as opposed to cocaine. Cocaine was more readily found with, powdered cocaine with people that had money to buy it. Crack cocaine was cheaper, it was quicker, it was also dirtier, it was stepped on more, and people that used it were disenfranchised people that couldn't afford cocaine. So for the same amounts, right, you could go before a judge, you could have the same amount that you were caught with, but your consequence, your punishment for crack cocaine was so much higher than it was for that same amount with powdered cocaine. That is social injustice, right? So whenever, again, here's my point. You're asking me as a psychologist, whenever you take human behavior that is maladaptive for society or for the individual, and you punish the behavior without understanding that what you're seeing is the symptom, and you're not understanding what's going on here. Why is it more attractive for this person to be under the influence than to not be under the influence and to experience life not under the influence, right? But we don't allow those questions when we're busy punishing, and there's a lot of profiteering going on. So I think that answers your question.
It does. It does. It covers quite a bit of the next question too. I looked at the National Institute of Health reports And it said that over half of U.S. prisoners meet the criteria for substance abuse disorder.
Oh, yeah. And mental illness. And that brings me to that point that the substance is the symptom. The mental illness, what's happening here? Is it anxiety, depression? Is it trauma? Trauma, is so, when I say the word trauma, people think, oh my gosh, it's this devastating, catastrophic experience in someone's life. Mm-hmm. Trauma is anything that we cannot make sense of, we've experienced, and we can't process, and we can't ground ourselves in the knowledge and experience of it. That is trauma. So if you go with that definition, most people walking around have experienced trauma. Some of us are more resilient and hardier than others. You can take children who have, in the same household experienced, catastrophic thing, and one moves along and moves forward and the other one is stuck and, is really having a challenging time to incorporate all of that into their awareness. So, that's what happens in prisons, is we're not looking at any of that. We're not detoxing safely. We're not looking at, drugs. The use of drugs and alcohol causes physical illness as well, right? Cirrhosis of the liver, your kidneys, your heart, methamphetamine. Oh my goodness, you're asking your whole entire system to do this, right? That's why you crash when you stop using it, right? That's why you can have psychosis while you're using it. So, we have to start holistically. We have to holistically start to pay attention to the person as a whole and the system as a whole, right?
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Do you have any ideas on what policies we could implement to start shifting this focus away from a punitive model and towards a rehabilitative or more holistic, health integrative model?
It's happening, believe it or not. It's happening slowly. What we could do is decriminalize, I believe, that using drugs we could decriminalize it. We could start to treat it as the disease that it is. We can focus on, health and safety. But this is all systemic, and it's costly. Although prison is pretty darn costly also, but it doesn't, it's less, you don't have to interact as much with someone. It's less work to throw someone in a cell and say, yeah, I hope you survive. I hope you survive this experience, right?
Out of sight, out of mind if you're not in the system.
That's right. So, wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone automatically was, given the opportunity for rehab as we know it, detox? Hey, do you wanna stop using? And depending on the level of their understanding of what's going on with themselves, kind of address it from there. But you're talking systemic, from policing to, it's a lot of social injustice. And, you're talking about demographics, housing. Where are the lines drawn for voting? Where are the lines drawn for school monies from the Board of Education? Who gets what, right? And, that is steeped in very insensitive and unjust systems. And so it's a huge system.
It is, and that is really a hot button over the last year or more. It is these systemic injustices that we need to address. How do we as individuals, from a psychological standpoint, how do we as individuals even begin to start making these changes or to affect these changes that we would like to see, that we hope can come about in our system?
I think that awareness, is the first step always, right? Awareness. We can't change ourselves. We can't really have insight or the capability to reflect on our own maladaptive thoughts and behaviors without awareness. And then I think there is accountability. And I mean, each of us is accountable to ourselves. If we set a certain standard or a certain way of being in the world, self-reflection, if you are not capable of examining your own life, right? It is going to be examined for you many times in our society without your knowledge. And that's a scary thought.
That's a fantastic takeaway that I hope other people come out of listening to this with, because the way you just worded it sparked something with me.